Hi, I'm Trinity Harper. 12 years ago, my little brother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're just an ugly, disabled idiot," then laughed like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. Right after that, my own father grabbed my arm, shoved me toward the door, and barked, "I don't want you carrying my name anymore." That night, I walked out into a Denver blizzard with nothing but a suitcase and $800. No goodbye, no second chance, just the front door closing behind me. But 12 years later, I walked back into that same city wearing a dress I designed myself straight into my brother's wedding reception and watched every single person in that room freeze the moment they realized who I was. What happened in those 12 years? How did the slow, ugly failure they threw away end up holding the one thing that could destroy everything they'd built? If you want to know exactly how that night ended for them, and how I made sure they'd never forget my name ever again, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now because the full story is coming in the next parts. And trust me, you don't want to miss a single second of what happens next. Let's go. 3 nights before graduation, I was tearing apart the hallway cabinet looking for the stupid folder with my cap and gown forms when Dad's voice drifted out of his office. The door was cracked open just a little the way it always was when he didn't want Mom walking in. He had the call on speaker. I recognized the voice on the other end instantly. Mr. Caldwell, the old money investor who still held 22% of Harper Fashions. Dad kept his tone smooth, the one he used for people who controlled the money. "This is Richard Harper. Look, Caldwell, Trinity's dyslexia is worse than we thought. Severe. She still stutters under pressure, and next to Mason, she just doesn't photograph well. We can't have the public face of the brand tied to that. We'll handle it quietly after graduation." Clean break. I stood there clutching the folder so hard the cardboard bent. That's when I saw Mason in the shadows outside the office door. 13 years old, already taller than me, leaning against the wall like he belonged there. He'd heard every word. He looked straight at me, smirked, and mouthed slowly enough for me to read his lips. "Ugly retard." Then he actually laughed, quiet, sharp, like we were sharing some private joke. Dad stepped out, closed the door behind him, and finally noticed me. His face didn't even change. "You heard enough," he said. "I'm not saying it twice. I don't want you carrying the Harper name anymore. 1 hour. Pack and leave." Mom appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, eyes already swollen. Laura Harper opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. Nothing came out. It never did when Caldwell's money was on the table. She just gripped the banister and stared down at me like I was already gone. Mason stayed where he was, arms crossed, watching the show. I walked past him. He didn't move. I had to turn sideways so my shoulder wouldn't brush his. Upstairs, I grabbed the black suitcase I'd had since middle school. Threw in jeans, hoodies, the 2 dresses I never wore, my beat-up laptop, every dollar I'd saved from babysitting. I zipped it, dragged it down the stairs. The wheels rattled loud enough for the whole house to hear. Dad was waiting by the front door. He'd already taken my house key off the ring and left it on the entry table like trash. I stepped outside. -22. Snow hit my face like needles. I was wearing sneakers because I couldn't find my boots. The door shut behind me, soft click, no slam. Just done. I made it halfway down the driveway when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Unknown Boulder number. I answered, teeth already chattering. "Trinity. It's Grandma Eleanor. Don't you dare get on a bus tonight. Drive to Boulder. I'm leaving the porch light on and the garage open. You come straight here." I didn't cry until I heard her voice. I turned around, got into the 10-year-old Subaru Dad had bought for me 2 years earlier, still registered in my name, and drove the 40 minutes to Boulder through the blizzard. The wipers couldn't keep up. I kept thinking the car would slide off the road and that would be the end of it. Grandma Eleanor was standing in the doorway when I pulled in, 81 years old, wrapped in a robe, arms open. She didn't ask a single question. She just pulled me inside, sat me on the couch, wrapped me in the same Afghan she'd had since I was 5, and made cocoa like I was still 10. I stayed exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning in Boulder, Grandma Eleanor set a mug of coffee in front of me and slid the roll of bills across the table. $800, she said. Everything I can spare without Richard noticing. And before you open your mouth, we're not arguing about you staying. I started to protest anyway. She raised one hand and stopped me cold. You listen to me, Trinity. The night he threw you out, Richard called me himself. He made it crystal clear if I ever took you in permanently or spoke up publicly, he'd have me in assisted living by the next morning, doctors, lawyers, the whole show. He still controls the trust I live on. One phone call and this house is gone. My accounts are frozen and I'm drugged up in some facility where they won't even let me have real coffee. Her voice didn't shake. She just looked me dead in the eye. I'm 81. I'm not letting that man lock me away because I chose my granddaughter over his precious brand image. You staying here would hand him the perfect excuse. So you're getting on that bus and I'm sending money every month from the account he doesn't know about. That's how we win. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took the money. 3 hours later, I was on the southbound Greyhound watching Boulder shrink in the window. The first 6 years in Austin were brutal. Breakfast shifts, late-night delivery runs, cleaning offices on Sundays. Some months, I barely cleared $1,000 after rent. I kept a jar on the counter labeled Grandma. The first Tuesday of every month, a plain envelope arrived, $300 to $500, and one sheet of her handwriting. You're smarter than all of them put together. Keep going. That jar paid for speech therapy at the free clinic. Twice a week I sat with grad students until the stutter finally died. By year 5, it only showed up when I was exhausted or furious. Design classes were online, one painful semester at a time. I learned pattern making on a 10-year-old laptop balanced on a cardboard box. My first sketches were garbage. I printed them anyway and fixed them the next night. In 2018, I opened an Etsy shop under T. Harper Designs. 3 pieces: a wrap dress from deadstock denim, a cropped linen blazer, a silk scarf dyed in my kitchen sink. 12 sales the first month. Grandma Eleanor bought the scarf and sent a photo of herself wearing it at the farmer's market, grinning like she'd pulled one over on the world. Orders grew. I dropped the cleaning gigs, then the breakfast shifts. In 2021, a local investor wrote a $50,000 check after one coffee. By 2023, revenue crossed 7 figures. I moved into a real apartment, hired seamstresses, leased a proper studio, switched to sustainable fabrics only. The company had a name, offices and numbers most 30-year-olds in fashion would kill for, but I kept the Harper connection buried deep. Grandma Eleanor's letters never stopped. The handwriting got shakier, the envelopes thinner, but the message stayed sharp. Last year, she started adding the same PS every time. When you're ready to go back, you tell me first. I want to be alive to see their faces. I still have the original $800 in the same rubber-banded roll locked in the fireproof box with every letter she ever sent. By early 2025, I had 22 employees and revenue that would make Dad choke on his scotch. I was finally ready to buy that plane ticket back to Denver on my terms, in my clothes, with my name on everything. The first week of April 2025, I returned to my East Austin apartment after a 14-hour day spent finishing the fall collection. My assistant had already gone home, the studio lights were off, and the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and saw a thick cream envelope lying on the doormat just inside the door, pushed through by the mail carrier. Real gold edging, heavy, expensive cardstock. The kind of invitation that reeks of old money and new alliances. I picked it up with 2 fingers as if it might burn me. Mason Harper and Avery Langford, Saturday the 26th of April, 6 o'clock in the evening. The Crawford Hotel, Denver, Colorado. Black tie. Requested. I stood in the dark hallway holding it for a long time. 12 years of silence wrapped into a single sheet of paper. I flipped it over. No personal note. Of course not. Just the standard RSVP card and a stamped return envelope addressed to some wedding planner I'd never met. I carried it to the kitchen counter, set it down, and stared at it while the kettle boiled. Then I opened my laptop and booked the earliest nonstop flight I could find, leaving Austin and returning 2 days later. I paid extra for the exit row seat and didn't even blink at the price. That night, I FaceTimed Grandma Eleanor. It was past 10 in Boulder, but she picked up on the second ring. The screen filled with her face thinner every month, the oxygen tube barely visible, her hair still dyed that stubborn auburn. "I'm coming home for my brother's wedding," I said in Vietnamese, the language we used whenever things were serious. She looked at me for a few seconds, then the corner of her mouth lifted into that crooked smile I'd missed for 12 years. "Then you come back like a real Harper." She rasped, her voice worn down by decades of unfiltered cigarettes. "Don't make me ashamed in front of our ancestors." I laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in days. I wouldn't dare. She nodded once, satisfied, and hung up without saying goodbye. That was just her way. I started packing immediately. Not a single item in the suitcase came from another brand. The long white cashmere coat I'd cut and sewn myself last winter. The dove gray silk top still standing on the mannequin. The tailored cream trousers with invisible pockets. The boots I'd dyed to match the exact color of mountain snow at sunset. Every piece was mine designed, drafted, cut, and finished. I laid them out on the bed like armor. I zipped the suitcase, rolled it to the door, and left it there for 2 weeks like a promise. On the morning of the flight, I wore the white coat open over a black cashmere turtleneck and jeans. My hair was lighter than anyone in Denver would remember, oversized sunglasses on even though the sun wasn't up yet. I checked the bag, walked through security without looking back, and slept through the entire flight. When the plane banked over the Front Range, I finally opened my eyes. The Rockies looked exactly the same. I didn't. We landed at DIA a little after noon. I collected my suitcase, rolled it through the terminal, and stepped outside into air that smelled of pine and altitude. The Uber driver, a guy in his 30s wearing a Broncos cap, loaded my bag and glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Headed to a photo shoot or something?" he asked. "You look like one of those fashion influencers my wife always watches." I met his eyes in the mirror and gave a small, genuine smile. Something like that. He nodded, turned up the radio, and drove toward the city I hadn't returned to in 12 years. Saturday night, I stepped out of the elevator on the mezzanine of the Crawford Hotel and paused just long enough for the white silk dress to settle around my ankles. The fabric flowed like water cut on the bias, completely seamless, except for one tiny detail, the Everline logo hand-embroidered in white silk thread on white silk right over my heart. Almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. I walked down the grand staircase, every step deliberate, every breath calm. The security guard at the velvet rope glanced at the cut of my dress, the quiet confidence, the way I carried myself, and lifted the rope without a word. He even gave a small nod as if I belonged on the other side. I almost laughed out loud. 12 years ago, I wouldn't have even been allowed to clean the toilets in this building. The foyer was packed crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, champagne towers, the thick scent of money in the air. I moved through the crowd as if I had front row tickets, not like the uninvited ghost I actually was. Mason was dead center, arm around Avery, both glowing under the photographer's lights. He wore midnight blue velvet. She wore champagne satin that cost more than most people's rent. They were laughing at something the photographer said, heads close together, perfect couple, perfect life. I walked straight up to them. Mason saw me first. His arm fell from Avery's waist as if burned. The laugh died in his throat. His face slackened, eyes wide, mouth actually open. I stopped 2 feet away, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his neck. "Congratulations on your special day, Mason," I said softly, just for him. 12 years already, huh? Avery turned confused, her beautiful smile still in place. I'm sorry. Do you two know each other? Mason couldn't answer. He just stared at me like I was a hallucination. That's when Mom appeared from the side holding 2 champagne flutes, diamonds flashing on every finger. She saw me and the glasses slipped straight from her hands, hitting the marble floor and shattering into 1,000 crystal pieces, champagne splashing over her silver heels. The sound cut through the foyer like a gunshot. Every head turned. Dad was right behind her. He froze mid-step. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might collapse. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound. I didn't move. I just stood there in the middle of the wreckage, my white dress untouched, letting them look. Douglas Langford stood 5 meters away, deep in conversation with 2 investors in bespoke suits. His gaze flicked over at the crash, landed on me, then dropped to the tiny embroidered logo on my chest. His eyes narrowed. He tilted his head, stepped closer, squinted. I watched recognition hit him like a slap. He mouthed one word, barely audible over the music. No fucking way. The string quartet kept playing, but the room around us went dead silent. Avery looked from Mason to Mom to Dad, panic beginning to creep into her perfect features. Mason, what's happening? Mason finally found his voice cracked and small. Trinity. I gave him the smallest, calmest smile I had practiced in the mirror for months. In the flesh. Mom made a sound, half sob, half gasp, reaching out like she wanted to touch me to see if I was real. Her hand froze halfway, trembling in the air. Dad took a step forward, then stopped, as if he'd hit an invisible wall. Douglas Langford pushed past his investors and walked straight to me. He didn't look at Mason, didn't look at Dad. He only looked at the logo, then up at my face. Everline, he said, low voice. You're the Harper behind Everline. It wasn't a question. I met his eyes and didn't answer. I didn't need to. The dress was the answer. Behind him, Dad finally spoke, hoarse voice. Trinity? How? I ignored him. I pulled my phone from the hidden pocket in the dress, typed one line to Grandma Eleanor. I'm inside, don't worry. Sent. Then I slipped the phone away, looked back at my frozen family, and let the silence stretch long enough to savor. 12 years of work. 12 years of silence. 12 years of becoming someone they would never see coming. And now they saw. That same night, 15 minutes after the champagne glasses had hit the floor, Avery Langford excused herself with a tight smile. I just need the restroom, she told Mason, her voice trembling only slightly. She kissed his cheek, slipped through the crowd, and disappeared down the side corridor toward the private elevators. She made it to the marble restroom on the 15th floor, locked herself in the farthest stall, and opened her phone with shaking fingers. First, she typed the tiny embroidered logo she had seen on my chest, Everline. The search results loaded instantly. Everline Sustainable Luxury Fashion Brand, founded 2019, based in Austin. Founder and CEO, Trinity Harper. Current valuation, $680 million. Market share in the Western United States, 28% and rising. Direct competitor to Langford Fast Fashion across all major categories. Her breath caught. She scrolled faster. Photos of me on Forbes, 30 under 30. Me on the cover of Vogue Business. Me shaking hands with factory owners in Portugal. All organic cotton, all ethical labor. All numbers that made Langford's board sweat every quarter. A notification popped up. Unknown number. A single audio file and a PDF. The message above it read, "Thought you might want context." Ryan Keller. Ryan Keller. My old high school friend, now a corporate litigation lawyer in Denver, had been waiting for this night longer than I had. Avery pressed play on the recording. Dad's voice crystal clear from 2013. Trinity's dyslexia is severe. She stutters under pressure. We can't have the public face of the brand tied to that. We'll handle it quietly after graduation. Clean break. Then the PDF the disinheritance letter signed, notarized dated 1 week after I was thrown out. Avery's hand flew to her mouth. Another message appeared on my phone at the exact same moment. Ryan again. Sent. I opened the files, added one line in the foreword to Avery. Now you understand why Mason never mentions his sister, right? Send. I watched the blue check appear. Read. No reply. 2 floors below, the string quartet continued playing as if nothing had happened. Up here, everything had. I leaned against the cool hallway wall outside the restroom, my white dress glowing under the sconce light, and waited. 30 seconds later, the stall door banged open. Avery stepped out, face pale as paper mascara smudged phone clutched like a weapon. She saw me and froze. I didn't move. I just looked at her and let the silence do the rest. She opened her mouth closed, it opened it again. You're her, she whispered. The one they said didn't exist. I gave the smallest nod. Her eyes dropped to the Everline logo again, then back to my face. The realization hit her a second time, even harder. Your company. My father has been trying to acquire or destroy Everline for 2 years. He talks about you in every board meeting. That Austin upstart. He had no idea it was you. I still said nothing. Avery looked like she might be sick. She backed up until her shoulders hit the mirror. Mason never told me he had a sister, she said, voice breaking. Not once. I finally spoke low and even. Now you know why. She stared at the phone in her hand, at the audio file still open at my name, attached to everything her future father-in-law had tried to bury. I pushed off the wall, took a step closer. Tell Mason the wedding can go on, I said. Or not. That part's up to you now. Then I walked past her heels, silent on the carpet, and pressed the elevator button. Before the doors opened, I dialed Grandma Eleanor. She picked up on the first ring. I kept it to 30 seconds exactly. Everything's going well? Sleep tight, Grandma. She laughed, that rough, perfect sound. Good night, my girl. I hung up as the elevator arrived, stepped inside, and watched the doors close on Avery Langford still standing in the hallway holding the truth in her trembling hands. Monday, 9:00 a.m. sharp, Douglas Langford walked into the ballroom of the Brown Palace Hotel, flanked by 2 publicists and 3 lawyers. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions before he even reached the podium. He didn't smile. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice gravelly effective immediately. Langford Capital is terminating the $120 million strategic investment in Harper Fashions. We have uncovered material omissions regarding family risk and corporate governance that make further partnership impossible. The room erupted. By 9:12, Harper Fashion stock was down 28%. By 9:27, it had fallen 48%. Trading was halted twice before lunch. The CNBC ticker screamed HFAsh, 48.3% in red. By 10:05, the banks moved in. 3 armored trucks and a dozen security guards sealed the gates of Harper's largest factories in Commerce City, Longmont, and Aurora. $180 million in defaulted loans triggered clauses Dad thought he had buried years ago. Yellow tape went up. Machines stopped mid-stitch. Workers were escorted out with their final paychecks. By 11:30, the first shareholder lawsuit landed on Dad's desk: class action, fraud, concealment of material, family risk. 7 more followed before the markets closed. Mason never made it to Aspen. He was at the private terminal at Centennial Airport, boarding pass in hand, honeymoon luggage, already loaded onto the Gulf Stream, when Avery appeared in sunglasses and a trench coat. No makeup, no ring. She handed him the engagement ring in a velvet pouch and said, "I'm not getting on that plane." Mason laughed at first, nervous, confused. "Avery, come on. Whatever she told you." "She didn't tell me anything," Avery cut in voice. Ice cold. She showed me. "Your father's own words. Your family's lies. My father just lost $120 million because of you people." We're done. She turned and walked away. The ring remained in Mason's hand. The pilots closed the door. Mason stood alone on the tarmac as the jet taxied away without him. Back in Cherry Creek, the house was a war zone. Mom was in the kitchen screaming at Dad through tears, throwing financial statements like weapons. You swore it was handled. You swore no one would ever find out. Dad's face was gray. I paid lawyers. I paid everyone. Their voices carried through the open windows to the street. Neighbors pretended not to hear. At 3:17 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled into the driveway. 2 divorce attorneys stepped out, one for Mom, one already retained by Dad. Papers were served on the marble kitchen island. Mom signed first. Dad didn't even read his copy. At 4:02 p.m., Dad locked himself in his study, poured 3 fingers of Macallan, and dialed the one number he swore he'd never use again. Grandma Eleanor picked up on the 4th ring. Eleanor, he started, voice cracking. Don't, she said, calm and final. Don't call here anymore. Click. The line went dead. He called back. Straight to voicemail, left 7 messages in 20 minutes. She never answered again. By 6:00 p.m., the news cycle had moved on to fresh blood.